Greetings, this is Amy Wentley. Today's video is a knitting technique video, and the technique that we're going to be covering is duplicate stitch. And duplicate stitch is a way to actually, I'd say, embroider over your knitted piece and to duplicate kind of the stitch structure underneath so that it looks like the embroidery is actually knitted in. There are a few reasons that you might want to do this. The first is if you actually do want to embroider something onto your work. So here's an example of a Christmas stocking. And when I knitted the stocking, the white area was just plain knit. And then I took the red yarn and I stitched over the white knitting to get these embroidered letters on the top. Another way this can be used is I also did this puppy on the stocking, and the white part of the puppy was done with knitting, a stranded knitting, two-color work, the green and the white. And then I came back and I duplicate stitched the yellow part over the ears and the eyes, and I also duplicate stitched the eyes and the nose. So that's one reason you would want to do duplicate stitch. It would be to do embroidery actually on top of your knitting. Okay? The second reason that you might want to do it is if you made a mistake in a piece of Fair Isle or two-color stranded knitting, and I didn't make a mistake here, unfortunately, but if you wanted to cover over a mistake, fix a mistake after you've knit it, you could actually fix that with duplicate stitch, and I will show you how to do that. And then the third reason that you want to learn duplicate stitch is because it's a good way to weave in your ends at the end of a project, and that's doing duplicate stitch on the back side. So that's what our video is going to cover today. Thank you for stopping by for this. Hope all is well with you, and here's the video. So I mentioned in the intro that there are three ways that you can use duplicate stitch, and the first one is to embroider words on your knitting or details on your knitting. And so for this one, I just had a plain white knitted section and I used red yarn to duplicate stitch the letters on top. Okay. Here I did the dog in two-color stranded knitting, green with white, and as the background, and then with duplicate stitch I added the yellow and the black details. So in order for you to work this sort of thing, you probably need some kind of graph or some kind of map to follow. And so what we usually do is use a knitting graph, and sometimes the patterns will include that information for you. Sometimes you can do this yourself. So I just want to give you the tip that if you're going to design your own words or your own pictures for your knitting to duplicate stitch, you're going to want to use something called knitted graph paper or knitting graph paper. And you can search for that on Google, and you can download pieces of knitting graph paper, here's an example, and print it off on your own printer. And back here is an example of regular graph paper. Now regular graph paper, I had to draw the lines on top of this because you can't really see them on the camera, okay? And sometimes my line drawing isn't, exactly straight. So forgive me that. But this is regular graph paper with the lines kind of darkened for you. And regular graph paper has squares on it. Well, it turns out that knitting is not square. Each knitting stitch is actually a little rectangle. And the way, the evidence you can see to tell you that is, if I take a ruler and I measure how many stitches I have in an inch here, I have 1, 2, 3.5 stitches per inch. But for rows, if it was square, I would have 3.5 rows per inch. but I actually have 1, 2, 3, 4.5 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4.5 rows per inch. So since I have more rows, I can fit more rows in an inch. Those are shorter than the stitches are wide. And so in order to really map something out that you want to knit or duplicate stitch, you need to have graph paper that has rectangles instead of squares. And here's why. If I mapped out this letter A on squares, on regular square graph paper, it looks like this. It's looks like an A. Looks great. I've got 7 stitches on each leg here, 2 for the cap, 2 intermediate stitches, and then 4 stitches across here. If I do that, same thing, on the knitted graph paper, my A turns out to be wider and shorter than my A on this paper. So if you used regular graph paper and then went and knit this A, it would be shorter and wider than the one that you planned on your square graph paper. So we need to actually plan on the rectangular graph paper. And so if I were to draw, this is the duplicate of what was on the square graph paper. If I were to draw an A on here and I wanted it pretty much the same size, I would go for maybe 1, 2, 3, let's see, maybe 8 stitches that way, and because I only had 7 on the square one, remember, so to get it a little taller I actually need 8 on this graph paper. And there you go. So now my A is going to look something like this, and I'm actually going to put my bar across down a little further. So I have 8 here, 8 here, so it's 10 stitches this way, and I have 6 stitches this way to get an A on the knitted graph paper. So you'll want to get, before you start to embroider duplicate stitch, you're either going to want to make a graph on knitted graph paper of what you want to knit, or if you're following a pattern, there should be a graph in there for you to follow. Okay, so I'm going to use this to duplicate stitch on this fabric that I knitted. Okay, and so how I'm going to do that is I figure out, first you have to figure out how to line it up, and so you would really want your 2 middle stitches, let's say in this case, to be near the middle. And so I've got 20 stitches here, so I want to come in from the edge 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, this column here is column 10. And so just to give myself a point of reference, I'm going to put a stitch marker in here to show where the middle is. Okay, there you go. So that's the middle. So looking at my chart over here, I know, and I need to decide how far I need to come down to. So I've got 10 stitches. Do I? Yeah, I've got 10 stitches, and actually I think I have 10 rows here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, so this will be easy. So I have 10 rows in my graph, and I've got 10 rows of knitting here, so it's going to be close to the top. Normally, you know, I would recommend you have some buffer in it. You're centering it on your piece, which is probably going to be bigger than mine. This is just a demo piece, so I appreciate you bearing with me. So then you want to take a piece of your yarn that you want to embroider with. Okay, and I'm using this white yarn, and you want to get maybe a couple feet, maybe close to a yard. Depends on how much embroidering you want to do and how much you want to refill your needle. So I got about a yard there, I think. Is that right? Yeah, it's about a yard. So I'm going to thread my embroidery yarn, the yarn I choose to embroider with. So if you're really wanting to cover up the stitches underneath and make it look like this is part of the knitting, then you are going to want to use a yarn that is the same size, the same weight as what you were using to knit with. Okay. If you use something thinner, then you're going to be able to see the stitches underneath, and it's not going to look like it really belongs to the knitting. So let's say I'm going to start here, and I know that my cap is 2 stitches, so it's going to go here. Then that transition right there is 1 stitch, so that's this column. And then so this column here is going to be where my 8 stitches along here go. Okay, so I'm going to start at the bottom stitch, and I am going to come up under a V. Okay, is that correct? Yeah, so I'm going to come up under a V. So do you see how each one of these stitches looks like a V? And we're going to follow the path of these stitches, and we're actually going to be following the path of where the yarn is actually going in the real knitting. Okay, we're going to come up at the bottom of the bottom V here. See that? And then we're going to pull our yarn through, and we're going to leave a nice tail that we're going to weave in later, actually using duplicate stitch. So leave yourself a good tail to weave in. Okay. And then we're going to follow the yarn. So this yarn here on this right leg is going up here. It's going under the 2 legs, and then it's coming down here back where it started. So we're going to come up here, put our needle in under this leg, put our needle in under this leg, and pull through. And see how it's covering up the right leg of that knitting, so you can't see under it. Okay, that's what our goal is. And then you're going to be following this leg again and putting your needle in right back where you started. And that's our first stitch. Okay, I can show you some shortcuts too in a little bit, but just let's get this part down. So that's our first stitch, and see how it's laying over the stitch under it. It's duplicating the stitch under it. So now your yarn is underneath your work. You're going to take your needle underneath your work, and you're going to come up in the middle of the V that you just made, and that's the base of the V above it. So pull your yarn through. Okay, there you go. And then you're going to follow this leg up on the right, which is going to go under the 2 legs of this V, and then come back down here to where you started. So I'm going to follow the right leg of the V and come under this leg, come under this leg, and pull through. And see how that's covering up the right side of the leg there. And then I'm going to put my needle back down at the bottom of the V to cover up that left leg. I'm going to pull through, and the yarn covers up my left leg. And there you go. I've got 2 stitches done. Okay, so now I'm going to bring the yarn up from underneath again, between the V I just made and the bottom of the next V. And so I'm going to pull through. I'm going to follow the right leg. Please pardon the siren. The emergency department does not contact me before I video, so it's gone already. So you pull up from underneath, go over the right leg, you come under the 2 legs of the stitch above, and pull through. Now a little shortcut you can do is, when you go to put your needle in the bottom of where you started this V, okay, you can also kind of tilt the needle and have it ready to come up at the bottom of the next V. So watch this. So that completes the left leg, and it also got me started on the next V. So I came up from the bottom here, and I'm going to follow the right side of the V under the 2 legs and pull it through. Oops, there's another siren. And then back where I started, and then I'm going to bend my needle a little bit to bring it up to the middle of the next V and pull it through. So that's 4. And I'm going to quickly do the next 4. You can just watch while I work. That yarn's bumpy. 2. Okay, so when I go to do the last stitch in a second really, I'm going to, since I want to change direction now, what I'm going to be doing is, so I did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I came up to work the 8th, right? So I'm going to work my 8th stitch, but this time I don't want to do the shortcut of coming through the middle of the next stitch because I'm not going to be working the one up there. So I'm going to follow this right leg, put it under both legs, and I'm going to go under where I started. Okay. So now I want to do, ooh, baby. This last stitch I did, this is the stitch that's next to it. Okay. I want to come up and I want to do this one stitch that's kind of cat-a-corner. If you look at the picture here, it's going to look like that. So now I want to come up at the base of the stitch that's cat-a-corner of the one I just finished. And I'm going to come under the 2 at the top and go down where I started again. And so that's that one stitch. There we go. Okay. And then I'm going to want to go up here and do these 2 stitches at the top. So this stitch here is the one I just finished. This is the one right next to it. So I want to come up from underneath at the bottom of the stitch that's again cat-a-corner to this stitch. So I come up from the bottom and I'm going to go under the 2 legs, and that happens to be the bind off. So sorry I made this so small, but whatever, you can see that you can still do it. Then I'm going to come down where I started again. And then I want to do the stitch next to it. So I'm going to come under from the bottom of the stitch next to it, follow the right leg and come under what turns out to be the bind off because I'm so close to the top. And here. And then I'm going to want to come cat-a-corner down like here. And if you look at the picture, it's cat-a-corner down that way. So this is the stitch next to the one I just finished. I don't want to do that. I actually want to come down one from it. So I'm going to come up from the bottom of the stitch cat-a-corner this way. And down into the stitch. And now I can go ahead and I can do this long line of 8, and that's going to be, this is the stitch next to, so I want to go 1 down, so I want to come up at the base of that stitch, whoops, I split my yarn there, come up at the base of that stitch, and I'm going to want to come under the 2 legs and back where I started. And this is where we could do another shortcut. So when I come back into where I started, I can actually dip my needle and come down one stitch. Make sure you don't catch your stitch. Keep your yarn out of the way. And pull, and you've got that. So I come up the right leg and under the two legs I just made, and come back down to where I started, and then tip under the next stitch. And see what happens if I don't move my yarn. I get a weird knot like that. So you got to make sure that you don't get your yarn caught up in your stitches. Okay? Great. And so that's how we continue to do this whole business as we go. And what I would normally do is I'm going to finish these 8 to get the leg done all the way down. And then I will come back. Here, I'll show you real quickly. You're patient people. I know you are. You watch my videos and some of them are kind of long. If you pull too hard, you can kind of scooch it out because it can get really sucked down. Do you see that? So I can pull that leg out because you don't want to pull this too tight. You really want these stitches to just lay nicely on top. Okay? And that's 4, and this is 5, and this is 6, and this is 7, and this is going to be 8. Okay, so here we are. And this is very puffy yarn, and it's very big yarn, so it's really kind of popping out. You can see that happening. So that's what A looks like so far. And then all I need to do is, if I look at my graph, I count up 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to be the 5th stitch from the bottom. So this is my bottom stitch. Oops, this is my bottom stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the bottom of the 5th stitch. And you also know that it's 1, 2, 3, 4 from the top. So I'm in the right place. So that's going to leave a strand in the back here. Make sure you don't catch other things. That's going to leave, and I did. I went right through my tail. Wasn't that clever? Okay, so make sure you don't capture too many things back there. But that strand is going to be back there. It's fine. And I'm going to go ahead and work the 4 stitches. Look, all my tails want to come along for the ride. And when I come down to the start of that stitch, then I could do the shortcut of coming over to the right and coming up from the bottom of the stitch next to it. It's just a little shortcut, but generally you're coming up the right leg and then putting your needle right back in where you started to come down the left leg. And I think I split yarn there again. This isn't, you've heard me, and if you've watched my videos before, you know this yarn splits a lot. When you buy a lot of yarn and you want to get it cheap because you're going through a lot of demo yarn, sometimes you sacrifice things like splittiness. So that's it. That's my A. And I will tell you one thing too is that the embroidery does look prettier once it gets blocked. So a little bit more consistent and everything. But that's an A. Okay? So the next thing I am going to show you is how to weave in your ends using duplicate stitch. So let's turn this over, and we now have 2 ends that we need to weave in. If you weave your yarn in using duplicate stitch, you will not be able to see it from the front. So, you know, if I just went like this and poked my yarn through and pulled it through, you would see it in the front, right? We don't want to see the yarn in the front. We want it to be hiding in the back. So The way we do duplicate stitch on the back is we are going to be following the path of the stitch, but we're going to be following it from the back side. So here's what happens. Let me get a little closer for you. Okay. If you look at your stitches on the back, and this is the back of stockinette stitch, okay? So this is how you weave in at the back of stockinette stitch. If you were at the back of a reverse stockinette stitch, you would weave in using duplicate stitch method, just like I showed you on the front. But we're going to be doing duplicate stitch on the purl side. So what you want to do is you will notice that in the back side of stockinette, the side with all the purl bumps, you're going to have things called smiles. So see that smile? It's happy little smiles all the way across. These are smiles. And you're going to have frowns. So you can see these are all frowny. Okay? What you're going to do is you're going to start, you're going to find close by, you're going to find a frown. Or no, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a frown. You're going to find a frown. And then if you look to the right here, right there, there is a smile. So you're going to want to tilt your needle a little bit and go under the next smile. Okay? Let me get my hand out of the way so you can see it. Okay? So our yarn is going to be going under those two, and then it's going to duplicate this curve up here. So our yarn is going to be traveling under these two bumps, over this frown, and under these two bumps, and ends right where we started. Does that sound familiar? The whole time we were doing duplicate stitch on the other side, I kept saying back where you started. So that's what we're going to be doing. Going under this frown and this smile, and then the yarn's going to loop over this frown, and it's going to go under this smile and under this frown. So it's going to go like this. And then we're going to go over there. We're going to go under these two. See them? They're kind of at an angle to the last one that we did. And we're going to pull under where we started. Okay? So see how that duplicates over there. And if we turn this around, you cannot see, that would have been right there. You cannot see where I wove that end in the back. It's just completely invisible. So this is where we started before, where the yarn's coming out. So now we're going to want to follow this smile, and we're going to go under this frown and this smile to end up where we curved here. Okay? So I'm going to follow this smile, and I'm going to go under this frown, and then bend the needle to the right a little bit, angle it to the right a little bit. Excuse me, and you'll see this is coming out where that one went in last time. So we're going to pull that yarn through, and then we're going to follow the curve here and go under this smile and this frown to end up where we started again. So you'll be curving this way, and then this way, and then this way. So this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way. So I'll do it one more time for you. I came out here, I'm going to curve under this smile, around this smile, and I'm going to come under this frown and under this smile, back where this one came in. And then I'm going to loop over. This yarn is going over here, and I'm going to go under this smile and under this frown and come out where I started again. And you want to do that for about an inch or two. I'm doing it for about an inch here. Okay. And when you turn it over, you can't see the woven in ends. So you can do this to weave in any ends, same color, different color, whatever, any of your ends that you're doing, to go ahead and weave them in the back and to hide them. The one caveat I will give you is when you weave in ends this way, sometime what's happening is your fabric is twice as thick. Okay. If you're doing something like this with really bulky yarn, and you know it's going to be a bulky-ish kind of sweater, you really can't tell the two layers because everything's so bulky already. If you're using something like lace weight or you know, lace weight, mohair, fingering weight yarn, if you weave in this way in the back, sometimes you can see, depending on what size needles you use and everything, sometimes you can see a thicker part of your fabric. So I suggest if you are weaving in ends that you try to do it near the edges, not smack in the middle of a big empty field of stockinette, okay, because you might be able to see the doubleness in the middle. If it's hidden over towards the side, it won't be as obvious. So I've showed you how to do duplicate stitch for embroidery. I've shown you how to do duplicate stitch to weave in ends, and the next thing is how to hide mistakes in two-color stranded colorwork knitting. So here you go. So let's pretend this is a piece of two-color knitting that I did. And actually in the real hat that I made out of this, which I can't happen to find right this second, but the real hat I made of this, I actually made a mistake in the pattern on the hat and didn't realize it until after I wore it a few times of all the silly things. And I teach knitting. So anyway, it can happen to anybody. So let's say, just for the sake of this demo, that I made a mistake and this whole line here was supposed to be all the gray. I wasn't supposed to have those maroon or dark plum colors in there at all. It's just supposed to be one big stripe like that. So what I can do is I can take a piece of the color that I want to cover the other color. So I want this whole column to be gray, so I'm going to use gray. And what I want to do is I want to cover up these plum stitches so that it fits the pattern. So I'm going to come up from the bottom of the first colored stitch, and I'll get closer for you again. Oh, come on. There we go. So I'm going to come up at the bottom of the first colored stitch, and I'm going to pull my yarn through, and I'm going to make sure I leave a good tail that I can weave in later. I'm going to come under the two legs of the stitch above, pull through, and I'm going to come down into the place where I started. And that is covering up that mistake. Do you see that? Excuse me. Before I pull my yarn all the way through, I'm going to bring my needle up to the bottom of the next one I need to fix. And see how that first one I fixed is now covered up. You can hardly see it. You can hardly tell that that was different. I'm going to cover up the next stitch. I'm going to go under those two legs, cover up the right leg there, bring my yarn into the bottom, and then I'm going to come up to the next stitch I need to fix. And that's the second one. And if you want to move your strands around so that things look more even and that kind of thing, look at that. That's not bad. And then I'll cover up my last stitch and bring the yarn through into the back, and then all I have to do to finish the project or finish the fix is weave in my ends. And see? It's just like the mistake never happened. So that is the ins and outs of duplicate stitching. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you come watch others. Bye-bye.